This took place back in the 90s, so no one had a cell phone, nor could we just look up police reports on the internet to see if the area we were going to was safe. At the time, I was 14, and my parents had me in the Scouts. Now, people that know me would probably find this laughable because I do not come across as someone who have been in the Scouts. I was in it for the merit badges or rank, but I loved camping and what came along with it. One camping weekend came up and we gathered together in a parking lot. There were 8 Scouts and 3 adults that were going. I knew 2 of the adults and the other one was a new guy that was an Eagle Scout. All of them were in the military at the time. Only one of the other guys was my age and I didn't know him very well. All the other kids were a few years younger than us and I didn't want to hang around them, so the other guy and I started talking while avoiding the others. Turned out this kid was a piece of shit, but I was stuck with either him or a group of pre-adolescents. We pack into a few vehicles and get to the campsite at a park. The park we were staying at was just off a back road highway, and at the entrance of the park there was a group of newspaper vending machines, drink, snack machines, and a couple of payphones. A couple of the fat kids started bouncing in their seats at the sight of the drink and snack machines. "I don't want to catch you near any of those," said one of the adults. I sat back and enjoyed the whining that ensued. I was a broke kid anyway, so I didn't care. We ended up parking a little ways down the road, not far from the park entrance, and walked up to the campsite. From where we were, we could still see the cars, but not the park entrance. We unpacked and gathered our tents together. There was a large 8-man tent where most of the adults were to sleep, and a few smaller tents that a couple of the younger kids wanted to sleep in. After we put up the tents, the other kid my age and I began exploring. We started to hike a few of the trails, but they were overgrown. It seemed that they were rarely used and hadn't been cleared in a long time. Eventually we turned back and we were glad we did because when we got back it was time to start a campfire. Now, I'm a little arsonist at heart. No, I'm not going to burn down houses or cars, but when someone says campfire lookout, I was tearing through the woods looking for anything burnable. Twigs, fallen branches, small logs, absolutely anything. I had brought back a big pile of stuff before one of the adults looked at me and said, "That's more than enough, there's no use for all of that." My dreams for a large fire were busted. One of the adults said he had to go home for a while and would be back later that night. We waved goodbye as he left. We carried on as it grew darker, told stories around the fire while cooking our various foods. Eventually it grew late and we were all tired. We let the campfire die and buried it under a bunch of dirt. Then we all went to the tents and fell asleep in our sleeping bags. I heard it in my sleep. Something metal was being beaten on. I was awake, but sleep refused to let me go. A collection of groans let me know that I wasn't the only one that heard it. It continued, non-stop, as I rolled over and tried to bury my head in the sleeping bag. I just wanted to go to sleep. I don't know how long I laid there, but the banging kept going. Eventually, I got up and stuck my head out of the tent. There wasn't anything but darkness. I could tell that the sound was coming from the park entrance, though. I nudged the adult I had just met that day and asked him what was going on and what he was going to do about it. "It's just the park rangers working on something. Go back to sleep," he told me before rolling away from me. I tried nudging him a few more times, but all he did was grunt and call me an annoying little shit. I decided if I wasn't going to be able to sleep, I might as well enjoy myself, so I walked over to where the campfire was and started digging. I found myself in luck that there were still some hot embers left. Meanwhile, the banging had kept going. After a while, nature began calling, and I had to find a bush to pee on. I walked away for a few minutes, relieved myself, and turned around and started to walk back to the fire. Then I realized that the banging had stopped. I was kind of relieved that I could go back to sleep, but now I had this big fire that I started. I then noticed someone with a flashlight down at the cars. At first I thought it was the other adult that said he'd be back later that night, but how come I didn't hear his car driving up or see his lights? I watched for a little bit and realized this person was looking into the cars with their flashlight. I then heard rustling to the left of me. I was just far enough out of the campfire light that I hoped no one could see me. I pulled out my folding knife and squatted down. Somehow that knife didn't help me calm down when someone came out of the woods and towards the fire. I figured this person had circled around our campsite through the woods from where our cars were. He began walking around the fire looking out. He began shining his flashlight around while avoiding to shine directly on the tents. My heart was in my throat as his light beam flashed over me a couple of times as I squatted there behind some tall grass and bushes. After a while, he left the same way he walked in. I waited for what seemed like a long time until I heard the banging again. I stood up slow. Someone was still standing in the road but further down and away from the vehicles. It kept going. I stood there watching the guy down the road. I wanted to run to the tents and wake someone, but I was afraid that there might be someone watching and waiting. After a while, the banging stopped again. The guy further down the road began walking back up towards the cars. I crouched back down in my spot in time when two guys came out of the woods to my left and into the firelight. They began walking towards the tent. I could feel myself wanting to scream for everyone to wake up, but it wasn't escaping my throat. Suddenly they stopped, turned, and walked away. The banging started again. The guy with the flashlight moved back down the road. I still didn't know if there was someone waiting and watching. All I knew is if the banging continued, they weren't coming up to the campsite. Eventually the banging stopped. I heard rustling to my left again, but it sounded like someone was moving away. I stood up and I could no longer see the guy down the road with the flashlight. I stood there and waited, summoning up my courage, and ran to the tent and violently shook an adult awake. Unfortunately, it was the same new adult that I met the day before. I began to try and tell him what had happened, about the people. I was told that I was being annoying and must have dreamt it. I was mortified. I left and sulked while keeping a lookout. Dawn came and everyone got up. I tried talking to the other adult, but the new adult would cut me off and begin to chastise me for making up stories and lying. I was too exhausted to keep fighting with him. A few hours later, the other adult who had left came back. He began asking if we heard anything last night. The new adult said yes, he heard the park rangers doing some work last night. Well, it wasn't the park rangers. All the vending machines and payphones were broken into. A cop came to talk to us and take statements. He nonchalantly told us, "Yeah, someone's been robbing the machines after the bars let out. Y'all are lucky. Been several campers that they've attacked and robbed too." We never went camping in that area again. So, I'm a 26-year-old male and I had been planning a camping trip with my wife and dad for a whole year. I wanted everything to be perfect, as we don't get away from town and dive deep into the woods as much as I'd like. This takes place in the very tree-dense Davy Crockett National Forest in East Texas. Earlier that day, my dad decided to go a little early and pick out a good spot for us to camp. To give a layout of where we camped, there were 2 dirt roads on either side of us and an overlook to the north of us. We camped in the middle between the 2 roads. My wife and I arrived and met my dad down there at around 11 a.m. We set up camp and proceeded to enjoy the day until around dinner time. When we started to cook our meal for the evening, right as we got down with dinner, we see this truck circling around our campsite. He went around us several times and finally pulled right up into our camp and got out of his truck. He then proceeded to tell us that this was his family's campsite and how the firewood that was laying around was his. Now, in this particular forest, campsites are first come, first serve, and my dad had been there since 9 a.m. He then asked if he could camp next to us, and of course, being friendly, we said yes. We didn't know that when he said next to us, he meant directly on top of us. He backed his camper in so close to our tents and vehicles that he blocked my truck in. We weren't sure why he was doing this, being that there were so many other campsites available, but we just shrugged it off and tried to have a good time anyway. Not too long after that, we noticed a white Dodge dually circling around us. We had an off feeling from this truck because it went around several times, but we dismissed it because the area we were at was popular due to the overlook. After a long night of drinking and goofing off, we decided to go to bed. I was in a dead sleep when out of the woods, I wake up to a blood-curdling scream. I jolt up and ask my wife, "What the fuck was that?" About 30 seconds later, we hear another scream off in the distance. At this point, I grabbed my gun and unzipped the tent so we could see out. My dad had left a lantern burning so we could see a little ways into our campsite. At that moment, we see the white Dodge dually tearing down the road behind us. They continued down the road until they were out of sight. We heard them stop and get out of their truck, slamming the door and screaming. Then they proceeded to get back in their truck and drive very slowly down the other road that was in front of our campsite. At this point, we were terrified, thinking they were coming back to rob us, but they kept driving until they were out of sight. Then we heard them shooting. After the gunshots ended, they sped off. At this point, we thought maybe they were just drunk and acting stupid, so we didn't call the cops, and we didn't have a signal anyway. We just tried to go back to sleep. The next day, we had to make a beer run for my dad. When we made it out of the camping area and hit the main highway, there were police everywhere. They had stopped 2 young boys. We assumed they were the ones who were being troublemakers the night before and continued on into town. When we got back to our campsite, the cops were leaving after talking to my dad. They told my dad that the guys in the white dually had gone into the young guys' camp while they were hunting and were robbing them. The boys walked up on their camp being robbed, and the dually guys pulled out guns on the young boys, proceeding to rob the young boys at gunpoint. We think if it hadn't been for the people that camped right on top of us, as strange as it was, they would have robbed us instead. They made our campsite look bigger than it actually was. The people in the white dually were never caught. So, people in the white Dodge dually, let's not meet, because you might end up with a bullet. So, not sure how to start this, but here goes. My brother-in-law just heard this story this past Christmas, and he has been telling my sister and I that we should post it somewhere, here, anywhere. I'm surprised that my sister had never told him this story, but it really did scare her at the time, and we never discussed it much after a point in time. And I mean, it was almost 20 years ago that this happened. So it's an old story, and I'm pretty sure no one is in immediate danger. My family has some property that backs up to Carson National Forest in New Mexico. It's been in the family for years, and my sister and I both spent our summers up there. It's gorgeous, nice and green, cool mountain air in the summer. It was always a relief to get up there and away from the dusty ranch. My dad was ex-military, and having 2 daughters, let's just say we did lots of outdoor stuff. He taught us survival skills and how to defend ourselves. We hunted and fished and did lots of camping and hiking. To us, it was always a fun time, but I guess he felt that he needed to pass on his skills to us. We spent several weeks in the summer up there hiking with him and exploring the old cabins, mining communities, and checking the big ditch project that was built for Riverhead back in the late 1800s. I think that's the correct date for the project, but I'm not for sure. Anyways, it's a great place to hike with some beautiful high mountain lakes, streams, and lots of wildlife. This happened when I was in college and my younger sister was still in high school. My dad was still at home having to work and would come up every few weeks to spend time with us. We were up there with our mom, and she mainly spent time in town or around the property painting. We spent our time on the Jeep trails or hiking and sleeping. It was late June, maybe early July, I think, and we had decided we were going to hike up to Lost Lake. It's one of my favorite lakes up there because if you look at it from a certain angle, it looks like a heart. We set off in the morning and we prepared. We both had a small pack, our water, some snacks, and we both had a small hammock we planned to set up once we got to the lake, so we could just enjoy the area for a while. I will admit to being an outdoor type, and I swear when it's quiet enough, you could hear the trees talk. We also both always carried a knife when we hiked. My dad always insisted we have something, just in case an accident happened or we just needed it. The hike was going good. Since the summer cabin is pretty far up the valley, we just set out on the foot to the trailhead. To get to the Lost Lake, you take another trail that goes up to Middle Fork Lake, then you break off that trail for Lost Lake. We ran into a few other hikers, but they are going to Middle Fork Lake, and we were pleased because it looked like we could possibly have Lost Lake all to ourselves. It's a pretty good hike with some long switchbacks at the end, but totally worth it because the lake is just beautiful and a very pretty emerald green in color. We got there and saw that we did have the lake to ourselves. We hiked around the lake and decided to hike back a bit to find a good spot to set up our hammocks. We walked into the tree line and the first thing my sister said was, "Do you smell that?" And yup, I did. It was a dead animal with a strong scent of blood. We had both done lots of hunting and knew that smell, and that's when I saw it. It was a deer carcass, but what was around it was what disgusted me. Placed around the deer carcass in a circle were its organ entrails, but it wasn't like it was being cleaned. It's like they were placed in a certain arrangement with little piles of rocks in between everything. Now I know how some people get disgusting with their kills, and I have had some guys try to gross me out, but I don't fall for crap like that. But this made me uneasy. It wasn't just being cleaned, it was like it was set up in a certain meaning, or it had meaning. I step back from this weird circle, and then my sister starts to say my name but stops, because then we see the guy who had done this, and he looks like he had just climbed out from inside the deer because he is covered in blood and doesn't have much clothing on. At first I thought he didn't have anything on, but honestly I didn't try to check him out much. He was standing back away from his gruesome little circle, just standing close to a group of trees that were pretty close together. He was maybe 20 feet from us. I think he was maybe trying to hide, not for sure, but my dad had always taught us that if we ever found ourselves in a situation where we didn't feel in control of, to do everything in our power to try to take control of the situation. Do something that is going to take the other person by surprise. Don't do what they expect you to do. So this was raging through my brain, and I could also tell my sister was about to freak the heck out, so I stepped up and said, "Hey, pretty good kill you got there. Did you use a bow?" The guy just stood there, his eyes all crazy wide like he was stoked out of his brain on planet Pluto. So I'm thinking, great, we ran into a guy getting his hunt on, and he had lost it and was getting blood crazy with his deer. I still don't know what came over me, but I then put my hand on my knife that I kept on my waist, just to show him that I wasn't completely helpless. I don't know why I did it, but something told me to let him know that I wasn't going to back down or be afraid. I kept eye contact with him, and I would guess he was maybe in his early 30s, but I'm bad at guessing people's age. He was pretty dirty though, you could tell that even with all the blood he had everywhere. I start to back off and my sister had moved behind me, so I spoke again and said, "So you have a great hunting day." Again, the crazy didn't say a thing, just stood there like he was a statue or something, or like he thought I couldn't see him if he didn't move or make any sound. We moved back to the lakeside again and booked it around the lake. My sister stayed up front and she was shaking pretty bad. I was mainly pissed off at first, because if he wanted to get all crazy in the woods with his deer, then he should have gone further back up in the forest. We get back to the trailhead and stopped to get our bearings and looked at each other. I was scanning the forest line to make sure we weren't being followed, and my sister was just in shock. We started down the trail pretty fast, and I was hoping I could keep my sister together until we could at least reach the Middle Fork Lake Trail, or that we would even run into some more hikers, but the odds weren't good on this particular trail, because you have to get an early start on the Lost Lake Trail, and by now it was late morning. We were making good time and hadn't discussed what we saw, just started hiking back down, and started to get that feeling when you just know you aren't alone. I kept checking but I didn't see anything, or even hear anything at first. My sister refused to look back and just kept going, but I felt that I had to keep checking to make sure the idiot wasn't following us. That's when the first stuff came flying at us. It was some small pebbles, but it really pissed me off because it was obvious someone was throwing them at us, and it could have only been him. My sister was almost running at this point, but I am a mouthy smartass, and darn it, this was my forest. I had grown up here and these were my lakes, my trails, and I wasn't about to let some crazy dude ruin it for me. I started yelling back that he needed to go back to his deer and leave us alone. At this point, my sister is telling me to shut up and just to come on. And I'm thinking, no way, this guy's trying to scare us. The pebbles stopped and then we started hearing barking and growling noises. My sister said, "Now he is growling at us?" And I just told her to get on down the trail and ignore it. He was behind us pretty much the whole way, growling and making these barking noises every once in a while, but I never caught a glimpse of him. Once we got close to where the trail joined in with the Middle Fork Trail, he seemed to back off. I never caught sight of him behind us, but I could hear him and I just knew he was there. We started down the rest of the trail. My sister refused to stop or look behind her, so I kept checking every so often. Didn't see anything or hear anything. We started to discuss what had happened, and she felt like he was very sinister and felt like we had been in a very dangerous situation. I felt like he was just getting a kick out of scaring two girls. I mean, he had to have heard us coming around the lake. We weren't being quiet. It was the opposite because there are black bears up there, and we would always be pretty loud while hiking, hoping to scare off any bear in the area so we wouldn't come up on one. To this day, she still thinks he was sinister, and I think he was just trying to scare two girls and was getting a kick out of it. We told our parents, and my dad didn't like what he heard. He did teach us some more up-close defensive skills after that day, and forbid us from ever hiking alone or just the two of us again. We didn't hike up that trail for several years with anyone. It freaked my sister out, and I just didn't like remembering a time I was scared in the forest that I considered my own. I didn't know it at the time, but after we had gotten back to the house and told my mom, she had called some neighbors, and a few of the men hiked up there the next day to check things out. They did find the deer carcass and some empty hiking packs, like what hikers use, but they were empty. They also found a rustic campsite further back in the woods that had been cleared out as well. Hey guys, thank you all for watching. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that subscribe button and join the Nightmare Army. I'm always looking for new soldiers in my Nightmare Nation. And if you would like to support the Nightmare Army even further, please leave a PayPal donation if you want. So guys, sorry about not talking in my last video that I did. I was really busy that day, and by the time I uploaded it, I was at a friend's house editing the video, so there you go. But anyways, guys, I really hope you enjoyed the last video that I did. It's a new thing that I'm working on where, I don't know, I'm trying new different things on YouTube, and I'm trying to upload more daily for you guys. So I'm sorry if there's been, like, stories that have just been in 3. For me, it's just easier to upload more for you guys, faster to upload daily for you guys. I mean, if you guys want that, you know, if you guys want more stories in the videos, or if you want the videos to be longer, let me know down below in the comments. This is just a way for me to just keep on uploading for you guys and just keep, you know, keep the rhythm going, you know what I mean? But anyways, guys, thank you all for watching, and just remember, the best ideas always come out of nightmares.